Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another version, another episode of the Digital Couch. My name is Doriel Inez Larrier of Larrier's Education and Resource Network, where I plant seeds to help you grow. And I also say, Dumela, Saubona, Sakpaste, Namaste, Upshin, Dubra Ota, Assalamu alaikum, Hotep, for the Hotep people. And buenas noches, bonsoir, good evening. I know people don't understand why I go through that, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of backstory before I get into the person who is on my digital couch right now. And those people who are showing up, please do me a favor and press share, and comment. I need some of my stream team with me tonight. My stream team are those people who, if myself or my guests say something that is very inspiring or resonates with you, just retype it in the chat or ask a question that will continue to build our audience and continue to build those people who we are actually trying to reach. So the reason why I actually do all those greetings is because I, a couple of years ago, had this epiphany to reach a global audience. And so the reason why I utilize a number of greetings in other languages is because I am trying to whet, WHET, the ears of people on different continents who will probably hear and say, what is she talking about? My guest tonight is none other than Reverend Larry Kemp of the Bethlehem Nation. Some other people know it as Bethlehem Baptist Church in the city of Brooklyn. That's who we are chatting with tonight. Good evening, Reverend Camp. How are you?
Ms. Larrier, my great educator, I'm doing well. And it is an honor just to be in with you because of the effect that you had on Insight when I called you. July 15th will be a year. I called you around this time last year in June to go over it, and you said, yeah, you might want to be able to do this, and you might want to be able to do that, and you helped me with some very important information. And so, and I've, of course, Bethlehem knows I acknowledge that when I interviewed you, and how I acknowledge them. So, I would certainly say that you are a person of lifeblood when it comes to the digital couch, and I love the digital couch. I've caught many wonderful, vibrant people as relates to conventions, as relates to Dr. James Thornton, who I enjoyed. Dr. Honeywell was certainly really awesome. And so I enjoy by learning from the creativity of others.
Excellent. I thank you so much. So yes, actually, so you you have done part 2 of my intro for me, which is those people who have been with us for, thank you very much, because like we work tag team like that. Those people who have, no, you'll do it the other way. There we go. Like that. There we go. So those people who have been with us for a few weeks know that this is episode 3. So first, this series is called Ministers on a Mission. Ministers on a Mission. And as I said in my intro letter to the ministers who are actually sitting on my digital couch, I said, I have watched you not only preach in the pulpit, but also serve in the streets. And I wanted other people to know not only who you are, but what you do, how you serve, who you reach, and who you're intending to reach, not just here in the local spaces, in the community, but across the state and the nation, and of course, across the globe, if it does apply. So, thank you very much again, once again. And we're actually going to pop into our little series of questions. Now, those people, again, if you do know Reverend Larry Camp of the Bethlehem Nation, Bethlehem Nation. And actually, I'm going to bring up Bethany. I will please do us a favor and share it also, and invite people who you're who you know. And if you really, really know Reverend Camp and you know the work that he does literally on the streets, in the community, talking to really interesting people and engaging in critical conversations. That's what we're here to do, to engage in critical conversations. And you know that he has pulled on the ear, or pulled on the coattail of a number of different influencers. And so I just wanted the opportunity to sort of, some people may say get inside their brain. I don't really want to get inside the brain, but I do want to share what comes out of the brain. And that's what we're here to do. All right. So now this literally goes back 25 years, I guess, 25 years. So how Reverend Camp and I actually crossed paths.
Yeah.
I did some work at Bethany Baptist Church under the leadership of Dr. William Augustus Jones. And in that light, there were just, I was just exposed to a number of influential leaders in the community while working there. And so Reverend Camp and some other ministers, it was just part and parcel of the work, part and parcel of the opportunity. So just very blessed and honored to have made their acquaintances and again engaged in very critical conversations that started. And of course, people would sort of look at me, and my stature is a very small person, but I may be short in stature. What is it? But like big in heart and big in ideas. And so most people would just kind of look at me and go like, but now 20 years later, they're like, oh, now we get it. Like now we get it. So I just, again, thank you for the friendship and the collegial exchanges. There we go. So let's get going. Let's get going. So I am now, if you please give the intro to people who may not know you, because there are people who just know me and don't know you. Who do you serve? Where do you work? What is your community like? What's your church like?
Sir, well, that's an interesting question because I was called to preach at 17, and I didn't respond to that call till 6 years later. And a lot of it had to do with selfishness. You know, you're 17, you don't want girls to think that you're lame, and, all the other kind of stuff that you're going to be a preacher. So I did not accept the call until I was 23. That's one thing. The other thing, I never at all ran after churches or pulpits. I've heard the stories of many of those who would put their resumes into 6, 7 to 25 churches at a time, almost like playing dice, just to be able to get one church. Bethlehem happened, and this is the truth. When I got called there, many pastors were telling me, who didn't really know me, who said, that's a hellish church. And they were, at the time, you have to remember, I'm the 8th pastor in the church's now 76-year history. My sainted predecessor, Reverend Roland J. Nyman, served 17 years. Prior to that, 2 preachers served 8, a couple of them 2 months, another one 5 months.
Okay.
It was that kind of thing. And what the history of what people would tell me, like the late Dr. U.B. Whitfield, they would throw preachers out of a church and brag about it. So my prayer was that, God, that Bethlehem would not be remembered for that.
Let's do that.
And the East New York section, which is the place my mother used to send me when I was a teenager, preteen, and go down to shop at Richfield's. Now, this is before your time. Richfield's down on Pitkin Avenue, which was a great clothing store for a cheaper price and great quality. So I only know East New York and Brownsville through going to Richfield. So I got called to the church. When I saw the sanctuary, Ms. Larry, I said, there were metal chairs, linoleum floors, a raggedy curtain, and the sound would bounce up. And I said to myself, not prejudging, but they were those who were judging me. Now, mind you, I had not a degree, but I was going to school. But many of them were judging me on the fact that I did not have a degree. What I didn't even tell them was that I didn't feel I should have to tell them I'm going to college just to satisfy their own curiosity, where they still would have found a way to not be acceptable anyway.
So this is a great segue to when, let's say, you walked into the doors through the hollowed doors. How have you seen your ministry grow? And of course, like my only connection with Bethlehem, and we talked about this before. I've actually had two people in my life who were a part of Bethlehem Baptist Church, so I sort of had another
Version.
seat, right? Another version, right? In with the church. But how do you see that your ministry in the church has moved to your ministry outside of the church? And so you speak about knowing about East New York and Brownsville. And so you've definitely done a tremendous work in the church. But how have you taken it outside into the streets, into the community? Because I know your hands and your feet are on the ground. How have you taken the ministry outside of the church walls?
Well, growing up in Brooklyn, I grew up in the Williamsburg projects, uh, down in that area. The only project with no elevators, four steps, four floors, I should
Four
say.
landings. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, four landings. Yeah, and so by coming to East New York, Brownsville, yeah, East New York and Brownsville have its own history
Mm-hmm.
of gangs, of violence, of police brutality. And people may not realize that Al Capone, before he went to Chicago, grew up in the Brownsville, East New York section of Brooklyn. He was a bouncer at a club in
Uh-huh.
Brooklyn. And it was John Torrio who summoned him to Chicago. And so East New York has his length. And by coming out of the projects, I was at least being able to understand how the streets were and how the streets are. Now, mind you, I was not trying to impress the act streetish in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Game knows game, street knows street.
Right.
And so most of the people who in the black church growing up when I was a kid, they came from the Southland, South Carolina, North Carolina. They came from Georgia. They came from Virginia. Very rarely did churches in New York call pastors, particularly from Brooklyn.
Right.
Very rarely. And so by the time I got here, there was, the we one of the things we did on the street was on Palm Sunday, we deliberately would march around
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
community and hand out palms to the point that
Beautiful.
William
Beautiful.
Augustus Jones, the late William Augustus Jones, asked one of my friends, Reverend Jose White.
Mm-hmm.
He asked him. He says, "What's Camp doing over there? What is he doing?" But that was our way of really reaching out, and by doing that, they came in, and then of course the pantry that goes on now.
Excellent. Excellent. So that would be an example of like your civic responsibility, your social action. You have in your own, let's say, digital pulpit. I'll call this a digital pulpit where you share good word, you plant good seed, and you definitely are reaping great harvest. You've had some very interesting people on Insights, and
Including you.
I appreciate you. I really do. And I am very blessed to have been one of the people a part of the lineup. So I count myself in good company. That role, though, of doing that work and connecting those dots, and this is what I'm really excited about, that dots are being connected so that people, let's say, there's still like a stereotype of, okay, if you're from East New York, then this. You're from Ocean Hill, Brownsville, you're that, or you may have access to this. You may have access to that. I had an excellent conversation this weekend with a young lady at Prospect Park during Juneteenth, and of course, we can sort of take a moment to talk about Juneteenth stuff, not stuff, but the Juneteenth programming.
Right.
So, in that light, she asked me, she said, well, what is it? And I'm born and raised in Flatbush. I'm Flatbush, Flatbush. If you know, you know.
Yeah.
So
You
she
better
said,
ask somebody.
right, better ask somebody. She said, what is it that you feel is different about growing up in Flatbush, let's say, how many decades before and doing it now? And I said, well, one thing is race, let's say back in the 70s, it didn't really look like, at least from my perspective, it didn't look like the sort of racial tension that is occurring right now. I'm sure there was, but it just wasn't very prevalent from my perspective. Okay. From my perspective. And I said, she's like, well, I have grown up, I grew up in the projects. And so my access to information and to resources was different. How does that compare to you? And I had to say, and actually, so she attends uh, an all girls school in New England, which is very similar to mine. It's actually a sister school of mine. And so I said, once I found out what school she went to, I said, okay, no problem. It's like, you could be anywhere in the world. You find someone who's from Brooklyn, you're like, no problem. Like, we got you. I got you. And so I said, all right, we have a very similar background. And I said, I had a similar experience coming from Flatbush, then going to those of you who will just understand the term PWI, private white institution, that there's certain rose colored glasses that are kind of taken off and you're like, oh, it's almost like you don't know what your, let's say, your economic status is until you get somewhere else where the bar is different. And that's not to say, and I had to make it very clear, I said, that's not to say that just because I am a girl from Flatbush doesn't mean that I don't know how to switch my intonations, have what some people call the corporate conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever. So she said, I didn't have this access, and I had to respond to her and say, it wasn't that I was a girl from Brooklyn and I went to Erasmus and, therefore there were people in my life who saw my potential and said, let me do this. Let me take you from this side of the desk. Let me move you to this side of the desk. Let me then give you access and introduce you to people, send you to places, what have you, so that you would be able to expand your territory. You definitely do that. You have brought a number of very interesting people to your church, to your pulpit, to conversations, especially the insights, in order to expand the territory. And so if I may, take me, and I know the story, but I definitely want you to share it for the people who know me but don't know you. Share why you changed Bethlehem Baptist Church in its terminology. You've given it another name, and it has another name of the Bethlehem Nation. Where does the Bethlehem Nation come from? And because in my eyes, Bethlehem Nation is no longer just East New York, Brownsville.
That's correct.
It has at least a continental or, because it doesn't have to be or, it could be both and a very expansive and potentially global outreach. So where does the Bethlehem Nation come from? And what is the perspectives? Actually, I'm going to jump to, because of that question, how do you see Bethlehem moving, or the Bethlehem Nation moving in the next 5 years? Like, what's the vision?
Well, Bethlehem Nation came by a scripture that says, I made you a royal priesthood, a holy nation. It's biblical. We had someone who had said to a member in our church, and he belongs to the church, but he said it to a member by saying, but we're not a nation, we're a church. And the fact of the matter is, I wish he would have had enough guts to come to me and say that. But you know how punkism rises. So as a result of that, you know how important, more than I do, branding is.
Right.
Branding is very, very important. And so I just started doing it by letter. There would be a letter for Easter, there would be a letter for Christmas, and then I would sign it, or at the end of it, greetings to the Bethlehem Nation. And, I would just say the Bethlehem Nation. It wasn't something that was planned. It's still Bethlehem Baptist Church.
Sure.
Because I was told you can't change the name of the church legally, because then the history will be lost. And I'm not one that would want the history to be lost. So some people would think that it's a nickname. No, we call it the Bethlehem Nation. And as you would say, also known as Bethlehem Baptist Church. The second thing is that denominational wise, we don't deny that we're a Baptist church, but we also want to be able to reach out, as you were saying, pointed out so wonderfully, as a broader perspective. It's nation time. That they used to say that back in the 60s when I used to go to the School of Common Sense where Sonny Carson was.
Right.
And as a
Oh,
result of doing
bring back
that,
Sonny Carson. Yes.
Sonny Carson, and for the what a lot of black people did not know and probably don't accept is that Christianity was hard to convert people in our community on the basis of the fact of how it was taught to the King James Version. Now, there's
Correct.
nothing wrong with the quotes of the King James Version, but one of my professors, Mr. Sherud, said that NET, NIV, New International Version, New ET Version, all of these versions, the Messenger Bible, they have more connection to Hebrew than the
Hmm.
King James Version.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of that, we did that to not only add a community, but we also did that where people became curious, where they came with us, and then one person came. He said, after a while, coming for a while, he said, "Are y'all a church?" I said, "Yes." But the church does not. It's not just its building.
Right.
The church is its people, or I would say, is its tribe.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
It's its
agree.
tribe.
So then the other part to that question is, where do you see the church, the nation, the Bethlehem nation moving in 5 years? I mean, amidst the fact that we're all trying to address Rona, but now that we have to, and this actually it's a social media question. Last year when we had this conversation, or when we were starting to have this conversation, actually it was even before this time. So I think you and I were talking about the possibility, maybe it was even like January. So before we even hit this, before this even hit us, you were toying around with some ideas. And I was trying to repeat to you that the digital platform to
Yes.
engage people
Yes.
who need to be ministered to
Yes.
has to be incorporated. And still at that time, the pushback a little bit, with the exception of people who are doing the big churches, right? The mega churches, who, what is it, appease to the bedside Baptists, right? And when we got into this conversation, and it was a tough conversation, we were discussing, uh, what a number of ministers were really concerned about. If I take it to the digital platform, they're not going to show up. They're not going to come. And I said, but what about the people who are not able to get out of the house? What about, let's say, new moms or
Yeah.
people who are caring for their elderly families? If they're not able to get out, it's not the accessoride thing. The families, if a member is, bedridden, they still want to participate. They still want to engage. And I know the pushback was, but that's only a small amount. Like I always love to use the bell curve, right? That's only a tiny bit of the either one of the either ends of the bell curve. So what about the massive people in the middle? And I tried to keep saying with all the tact that I could, if God has the people for you, because I'll say y'all throw it at us. What God has for you is for you. Don't be concerned about like the big folks who got the 25,000 whatever. As my
Absolutely.
pastor says, shout out to Reverend Dr. James Arthur Thornton. Those big folks, they're not coming to see you if you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
Right? No, we
Absolutely.
we we need the people who will call us on the phone. We need the people who will receive the call in the middle of the night. We need the folks, who will come and visit us. We need those people. We need those people who may go down to let's say to court and on our behalf and what have you. Those are the people that we need, right, to do like the daily work, and those are the people who we can reach out to. So in that light, now we see, because we've been forced to, it not only, and it wasn't, we were thinking, oh, this is going to be like 2 or 3 weeks. Isn't it 15 months later? It's, last I checked, it's 15 months later. So and I'm not saying I'm happy about this, but I'm moved that people who thought they're not going to show up if I don't have them show up in the building, now people have to work a little harder. Now people have to get creative and get out of the traditional pulpit
Yeah.
and figure out how to do church differently. And you've done a great work with that. So tell me how you've been able to expand. I kind of already know the answer because it's insights, but like tell me how you were able to move and grow your platform, incorporating this digital platform, and what's the response? Like how have you grown the people who listen to you? Hopefully you're reading your analytics because I told you about that. We
Yes, you
talked
did.
about that.
Yes, you did. You know, Calvin, Bishop Calvin Rice of New Jerusalem in Queens,
Mm-hmm.
he had a forum. He was talking to a room full of pastors, and he talked about that you're going to have to look at branding more. And we talked personally. He said, you know, can't it'll always be New Jerusalem Baptist Church, but we call it New Jerusalem Worship Center. So when he was in that forum and I was there, he says, he says to the preachers, you have to do something about changing your brand. And then he said, like what Reverend Camp does over there, Bethlehem Nation. And the thing is that we're trying to do that, and when we're trying to expand, prior to COVID, it was announced to Bethlehem that we were going to move into jazz every 3 months. Just have the fellowship hall, but I know we'll go into something like that, the jazz, and
Yeah.
then we wanted classical to move in. I don't
Oh,
play any instrument.
wait a minute. Like jazz vespers at Emmanuel, I think. Emmanuel Baptist Church.
Where Doctor
It, uh
Dr. Trufant is.
True Font, yes. Yeah, they have
Yes.
a jazz vespers. Beautiful. I've actually gone. It was like it was really nice.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. Hmm. Okay, so that's you wanted to expand in that regard to your community.
Well, yeah, to the community, because I think that I think people love, and I'm not saying anything. Those who came before us set things the way it was, and it doesn't mean it was ignorant. They used what they had to do what they wanted
Hmm.
to. But I think that when you have a thinking of people today, is that there has to be not to impress them, but certainly to draw them to Christ. And if they get drawn to, right now at our church since COVID, we say, look, you don't have to join. I want to get musicians in here who would teach classical, who would teach jazz, and you don't have to join the church.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because we want, and then people who do join the church, we don't say that they should come down the aisle any longer. We just say, come into the office with someone present, and because everyone that comes down the aisle have an uncertainty when they get down there.
Right.
So
They
I
feel a
think,
move of the spirit, but they may not necessarily know what that move is really saying. This is what you're kind of signing up for.
yeah, I
They,
think that's a good point. And we, as a church congregation, some years back, we were supposed to go to Africa, and you know, and I understand people could not reach the financial criteria, and so we never got to that point. But yeah, it's what I've seen moving to East New York and Brownsville more now, Miss Larry, that we've seen in Bedford Stuyvesant for years, is that you do see the moving of the Congo drums and African music in East New York, Brownsville.
hmm. Okay. Because so where do you think that was? It was relegated before. Like, what other section do you think that expression of spirituality? And this is where we can kind of get a little touchy. What part of Brooklyn do you think that was more pervasive versus it being in East New York and Brownsville? So that now,
Well,
like, oh, it's like a new thing.
the African festival has touched so many people.
I knew we were going to go there. And shout
Yeah,
out to the African Street Festival is coming back,
they're
so
coming back.
we'll be
Uh,
out there.
we'll be out there, and so I think it had touched enough people. Now there was a place in 1871 in New Orleans called Congo Square,
Hmm.
and in Congo Square, the brothers and sisters from the Caribbean and the brothers and sisters from Africa would dance and beat drums. They referred to it as sacred music.
Hmm.
And so whenever you hear the songs in the African American church, yes, there are the hymns that are primarily from Europe, but then we Africanized it. Yes, we hear the gospel of Kurt Franklin and various others, but it really has the beat of Africa. And so the African American church, as not the church, but Malcolm said some years ago, the African American doesn't know that they're more African than what they realize.
Right.
The
So,
African American church, in many ways, in some ways, not everybody, are more African than what they realize.
so actually, I want to let's stay on that for a moment. And I have this phrase in my head, or this theme in my head, from a former president of my college, and the theme was tradition versus innovation. And so I'm going to use that theme moving forward: tradition versus innovation in terms of the Black church. Um, who was it a couple of weeks ago? Was it Henry Louis Gates that did the documentary on the Black church? Am I
Black church, yes.
okay? I thought, and this wasn't a part of the conversation, but it's going to be right now because this is the little couch. Those of you who are just hopping on, who are just sliding through, again, this is Dorel Ennis Larrier on the digital couch with Reverend Larry Camp of the Bethlehem Nation, Bethlehem Baptist Church in the East New York and Brownsville section of the city of Brooklyn. Wait. There we go. There we go. Good. Right. And so we are talking about ministers on a mission. And so this whole conversation is about the mission that these ministers are taking, that are moving them out of the pulpit, that are moving them out of their church walls. And of course, the only other person that I know who utilizes that term is Donnie McClurkin, who like 20 something years ago was like church without walls. But that's just the person I knew who had that phrase. And he was like a renegade, like, oh my gosh, no, you church without walls unless you're doing tent ministry, right? So now everyone has to do church without walls. Everyone has to expand their network. Everyone has to go beyond the call and come up with something different. Those people who say, again, sans Rona, meaning if this 2020 was not the issue, and they would say, we've been doing it the way we've been doing it, and it's been okay. Why are we like, okay, you're donning your dashiki, you're donning, your African print. There are a number of people who that's them. That's not us.
Right.
We are I know my mother. Shout out, Mom. I know you're watching. She's gonna understand this. We have a relative who's, thank God, not thank God, excuse me, but she has moved on to her next life. And when I started asking questions about like our African lineage, she would say, no, we're from here.
Yeah.
And I said, but before here, and there was no answer. And so I said, well, what is the connection? What is the connection? So as I'm now bringing that to this documentary that Henry Louis Gates did on the Black church, and how, yes, there was and then it's actually the same idea came up with Aretha Franklin, where in the movie, she gets trained, right? She gets trained to sing, and it's more like she gets trained to sing the opera, but of course she has this soul in this gospel. And there was the like the warring souls, right? Like wearing the mask. And she was like, well, I know you want me to sing like this, and this is what is going to get that is acceptable. But then this like drive is in me. How have you as the minister, because your role is to lead a church, your role is to move the mission. How was it a difficult issue to sort of bring, some may say, an Africanized viewpoint, right, of like the Black Jesus that we went through like in the 70s to your church? Did you already have that before? Like, what was your sort of path of bringing the culture into the church and having it move with you versus having people move you to the side?
It wasn't difficult per se, but it was a difficult embrace. What I did is that we had the red, black, and green flag, which is right there on the pulpit. And
that's almost sacrilegious. I have to say that, because a whole lot of people would be
let me just say how ignorant some people can be. There was a minister that asked me, could you remove the Black Panther flag from next to me. Now he's a minister of the church, but he don't sit up there no more. And I said, that's not a Black Panther flag. So the it's difficult to embrace. You can't open, and you know this, you can't open any company or institution without the American flag, red, white. And now, if this person was offended by red, black, and green, you should have been more offended by red, white, and blue, even if you served in the service.
I need
Because the
somebody to type
lynching
that.
took place on that flag.
I need somebody to type that in the chat. You're right. Go ahead.
And the fact that America was two Americas in terms of the South and the North.
Right.
With Lincoln on one end and the brother from the president from the South. They were separated for many years. So when we put the red, black, and flag was put in, nothing had to be said. It just had to be looked at. And once it was looked at, it says something if you embraced it.
And so on that note, and now we're kind of crossing into, let's say, politics in the pulpit, which I did come up with that as a theme when I was working on having some of our elected officials on the digital couch. And so you saw, well, again, tomorrow's election day. So shout out to all those people who voted early or did their write-ins. I will be walking to the polls tomorrow to cast my vote. I make sure you have your ranking. Everybody hold up your 5 fingers. You need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just everybody knows, do not just put just one person, because then that's not gonna work. You need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many. Fill all those slots in. All of them. So of course, there was this conversation of, there should be this separation of church and state. But I am so thankful that ministers who are on a mission like yourself, like my pastor, shout out to Reverend Dr. James Arthur Thornton, who was the first person on my couch for this series, and Reverend Honeywell last week, yourself today, and actually we're going to be talking to Reverend Robert Linden next week, who have come out of the pulpits, gone into, let's just say, the politician's lane. Not that you're becoming politicians, but you are reaching across the aisles, right? You are engaging with them. You are having critical conversations. So although there is supposed to be, and this is where we're talking about tradition, where no, church should be church and politics should be politics, from my understanding, the church is where conversations pertaining to the rights of people, containing to human welfare, containing to, education and the human condition and civics and social engagement is supposed to be discussed in the church. And so I'm very excited when I see ministers who, not that you have to accept everybody, and everybody's stuff and everybody's platform.
Yeah.
But if they want our vote, they need to hear from us. We need to hear from them. And they need to know, if I'm going to serve a community, you need to know that the people who serve in a church, the people who worship in a church, those are your biggest involved, engaged community residents. I need to know what's on their mind. And so I'm very, very thankful that, you and some of the other ministers have taken a step off of the stoop, right? Off of the steps of the front door of the church and walked across the street to City Hall, to, the mayor's house, to, to Supreme Court, and said, hey, we need to have a conversation.
I think that whenever that preachers, ministers who do this now, including our rabbis, including imams, they do it because it's in their nature to do it. Now, separation of church and state really meant that the state would not interfere with your religiosity. Your religiosity would not interfere with the laws of the land. So when we talk about the liberation flag, it represents liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And someone who talks about the Bible, who speaks about the Bible, you can even talk about liberation. How could you even utter it and forget the fact what happened to the Jews crossing over from Egypt because of slavery? So I think that the engagement of ministers, the engagements of rabbis, the engagements of imam is because it's in their nature to do so, because they look at their children and their grandchildren who are coming forth. Because you always have to fight. If you're not fighting for yourself and the community, you have to fight for the children that's coming behind you.
So let me switch into, I love the phrase from Lift Every Voice and Stony the Road We Trod.
Yeah.
Where have your feet trod to do your greatest work in ministry?
I don't know what my greatest work in ministry. To be very honest with you, I don't put ministry in categories. There are various points of ministry that I've gone through, and there are various things that I've experienced in ministry. But I will say to you that in February 21st of this year, the church accepted my recommendation that my son-in-law would be co-pastor, and upon retirement, which is no time soon, or upon death, which cannot be predicted, he will take over. Because when and this is not for every church. I'm just talking about the church that I am. Is that every church has to move beyond, and it has to be free to be able to do those things and to look at its future for the best that it can for the community.
Right, right. And there are many other communities, and we know this to be true, many other communities who discuss, plan, and actively engage uh, those before on the sides and those who come forward in legacy building.
Yeah,
And so when you speak of branding, branding isn't something that this is going to be a fly by night thing. It's not something that's going to be like a 10 or 20-year thing. No, we're talking generations. And if we're going to base our decisions on biblical ideologies, when every time I hear the phrase 40 and 2 generations,
yeah,
whether or not people think that's connected, whenever I hear 40 and 2 generations, I think that, let's say at the beginning of that 40 and 2 generations, so number one, there was a knowledge, there was an intention, there was an impact, there was influence on somewhere down the line, somewhere down this line, there's going to be the Son of Man who will change the dynamics, who will, make sure that they take care of the entire community. It may not necessarily be in the 5th generation, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, but I'm going to keep telling the story. I'm going to keep telling the story. They're going to know who they are, where they're from, who their allegiance needs to be to. And I do believe to an extent that we do that in the Black church. I do believe that we do that with, let's say, with rituals, with protocols, and now we're going to shift into rituals within the Black church. But we have to keep telling the story. And so when I hear you speak about, the ministers who came before, who served before, and let's say their term, right, whether it's 8 months, 2 months, 5 years, 10 years, 17 years, I hear that telling that story to whoever walks in the pulpit after you, they need to know that same story. They need to be able to call those names of the people. My pastor does it as well when he speaks of, W.L. Stores, who is one of the first
oh
pastors of,
yeah, yeah,
right, of Salem Missionary Baptist Church in the borough of Brooklyn. I know these names. I've never met them, but I know these names. And so continuing to tell the story is extremely important. Now, when it comes to telling the story, which is part of our ritual, it's part of our practice. We are an oral uh, people. We continue to tell the story. Yes, it's written in the bylaws. Yes, it's written in the history books, but we have to keep telling the story. Why? So that it is on the lips of our children. So it's on the lips of our grandchildren and so on. There are rituals that, and even through this whole situation, that we have had to be altered to an extent. But again, last year, what are some rituals because of innovation, things people wanted to do differently, or even things that you may have wanted to do differently and you sought to do differently in the church? What are some rituals that you believe or that you see people may not necessarily take so seriously, and that you would want them to take seriously, whether it be a part of the liturgical calendar, and for the most part, the ritual would be a part of the liturgical calendar, or it is a rite. It is a rite. It is a sacred rite that you think, I really want people to totally embrace and like get into the soul. Like I love the phrase, the soul of Black folk, but connect this not just to the letter of the law, but to the historical construct that we come from. What would that ritual be for you?
Well, the ritual would be for me in terms of how it plays a part and ties in would be music that not only is in the hymn, but also, again, Congo Square, the sacredness. Liturgical dancing has always been around for a long time. Of course, it became even more so when it came down to the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But the construct, I feel, of Congo Square really gives us a ritual that says we dance. Now,
Mm.
you know, you and I came up in the church, they said, oh no, you don't dance. Oh no, you don't go
Right.
to the movies. You don't dance.
Well,
It's
you ain't doing
part
that
of
on Sunday.
it's part of who you are. But
Right.
when we dance in church and shout, that's dancing. My daughter Asia, when she got married, there were certain people she did not want at her wedding for reasons because they would not dance. And I did not want to have, she says, I did not want to have anybody there not enjoying themselves and looking sour.
Hmm.
Because this is a celebration for me and my husband.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think that's an interesting perspective on where we see the place that our cultural connection
Yeah.
has place in the church of today. So I'm closing my eyes because I'm having a vision of the Black church documentary that Henry Louis Gates did. And this is interesting because I wasn't even planning on talking about this tonight, but I did want to talk about it. So I'm glad I'm speaking about it with you. That in that there was this part about dance, and there was this part about it was really connected to like the Pentecostal movement, and how, taking on like this being in the spirit, and what being in the spirit looked like, and how it was like you either go left or go right. And so let's just say the left was very conservative, and so you had, let's say, and I'm not, there's no shade right now, but I'm just trying to put it into little boxes. Let's say you have Protestant, Anglican, uh, Presbyterian, and then you have like full gospel, right? You have Pentecostal, you have or maybe apostolic. I'm not sure really where that falls, but there was these two dynamics. And then for the first time, I never heard it before, but I was blown away that the people, and we're going to talk about through migration, the people that came from South, if they were raised in, let's say, the more spirit filled, right? The more spirit filled, the more like tambourine and shouting and what have you, and being moved in the spirit and moving their body and feeling the music. And you spoke about music and rituals and music and being filled with the spirit and letting that go and being free to express. And then when some came north, the division of churches, as soon as I saw the two images, I said, oh my goodness, I never knew, or it was never pinpointed to me how some houses of worship kind of have this warring soul on,
Yeah.
this is now like, okay, and I have to sit like this is how now we do church. This is what is acceptable. This is what is the right way. We sit, let's say, for the hour or the 45 minutes. We come in, we sing our two hymns, maybe we take the sacrament, we hear the word for 15 minutes or so, and then we go. And then there's kind of like the flip side, right? You going in at 9:30, you're not leaving till maybe 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. and nobody's saying nothing about it because that's just what we do. But there's more of the
Yeah.
explanation. There's more, and I was like, wow. And it didn't hit me until seeing it, even though I've lived with it for, a couple of decades all my life. And I never really knew that there was like a kind of like a bumping of heads of whether it be ministers or the church laity or
Yeah.
people who choose based on maybe where they're from, maybe their level in life, right? Or the stature that they want to accept to be accepted. And so it like, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on like the division of denomination in reference to connection to God?
Well, it's like tribalism. In terms of when you talk about different denominations and they have different points of worship, it's like there are various tribes in the Middle East and various tribes in China, and as a result, in churches, it's tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when it's tribalism, people and listen, the Pentecostals play a part, the Apostolic play a part, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, where my
Amen.
mother came out of, from
Mm,
South Carolina,
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
then you have the Church of Our Lord, and all of these, but they're
hmm.
all a black church. So even when we see these divisions, I think we may call them divisions, and yet there are still some people who have a problem with certain transformation, certain change. I think it stems from tribalism. There are different tribes, but same people.
So I do remember one part of the documentary that addressed classism
Yeah,
as it pertains to how people worship.
right.
And not to step on any toes, but there was a level of, and again, this was demonstrated in the documentary, and so people spoke about it. And then it was also demonstrated in the Aretha Franklin movie, how there was a level of like, no other way to say it, of like elitism, where if we were proper, if we sang the hymns, if we sang with like this, versus, like that's them over there. Like we're gonna do church like this way, and for whatever reason, it didn't hit me that there was like these two warring souls, and I said, but at the end, we're all sitting in front of the Father, right?
We're all sitting in front of the Father,
Right. Whether you
and
have chimes or you have tambourines, it's
right,
all as simple.
right. Listen, you had um, Adam Clayton Powell, the Abyssinian.
Hmm.
You had Cornerstone under Dr. Ray, and before him, they were referred to as elitist churches, as was Concord,
Mm.
uh, as was Emmanuel Baptist Church in Elmont, New York. That the
Okay.
pastor there did not want drums to be there.
Wow.
It wasn't until he died that the new pastor incorporated that into it. So there's elitism, and then there's tribal differences.
Interesting. Interesting. So now let's talk about that. Let's say the spiritual aspect that moves the soul, because now we're sort of like we're segueing into, let's say, music that let's say soothes the savage breast, right? And how, whether it be great is thy faithfulness, on a pipe organ. Shout out to the people that the church that have pipe organs, uh or it is let's say something by, no, I was about to say Richard Smallwood. Let's take it to the other extreme. Let's go to like a Kirk Franklin, right? Or a um, Fred Hammond, right? Something that's like just on a different spectrum. Not the one is greater
Sure,
or less, just different
sure.
different spectrum. That there are songs that, whether it's the timbre, it's the beat, it's the moan, It's the, whatever gets the spirit going, that can make or break a Sunday service. Can I get an amen on that? Like, ministers will know we need to have some really good music to get people ready to hear the word. Um, what are songs that, what's one song that you would say, if I need to come to Jesus moment, if I need to like be brought into the spirit, this is the song that always moves me. What would be that song?
Well, for me, it's two songs. Oh, Hail the Power of Jesus' Name.
Hmm.
And the other one is A Mighty Fortress is Our God.
Okay.
Because uh, those songs, and yes, there are many great upbeat gospel songs. You talk about Kirk Franklin. You talk about this young lady named Miranda. You talk about, at least at the time, Mary Mary. There's some very, very good ones. But the hymns, those two particular songs, and it doesn't mean I don't listen to the other songs, I do. But when you say A Mighty Fortress is Our God,
Mm-hmm.
it has the sound of guaranteed protection.
Beautiful. 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 I'm actually, of course, singing the song in my head and not like, oh, bulwark never. All right, I got it. I got it.
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
the song. I love the song. So now that's inside the church walls.
yeah.
I already kind of know the answer to the next question, but let's step out of the church walls. What is that song that when you hear it outside of the church walls that makes you stop in your tracks? It may make you bow your head, take a deep breath, and like be at total peace. What would that song be? What would
I know
it be?
what you expect it to be, and it's gonna be that. But I would also have to include soundtracks to Road to Perdition, The Bridges of Madison County,
Somebody type that in.
And Shawshank Redemption are very meditative songs to listen to. If you listen to the
Shawshank
soundtracks,
Redemption?
yeah, but you're looking at it from the movie perspective. I'm talking about the song.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up.
Well, and then of course there's John Coltrane. Miles Davis has a song that's about 9 minutes long called "So What," which is
Mm-hmm.
the right song for my character. So what?
Okay.
So what? You know. And then there's John Coltrane. He came out of a place called Hamlet, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
His grandfather and his grandfather on his mother and father's side were both AME preachers.
Yes,
So when
I read that.
and when he went at their churches, he always liked the sound and the rhythm of the church.
Right.
So when he got to play, and he played with Charlie Parker,
Yep.
and he played with Miles Davis, but he also went through a period in his life in which there was drugs, there was heroin, and he went to rehab.
Yeah.
He went to rehab as a result of it, and in rehab, he decided he's going to do another song after he came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the album that he did was A Love Supreme.
Yes.
The album was absolutely dedicated to God.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth track, because every piece, there's only four tracks. One
Right.
is 12 minutes, one is 11, one is 14.
Yeah.
The last one is called Psalms,
Mm-hmm.
just Psalms. And it was Thelonious Monk that said that John Coltrane was the most spiritual musician he ever met. But he wanted to represent, he wanted the dedicated to God, but he also was doing the sounds of the church. Not like we know,
Right.
although you hear some of that in his album Giant Steps.
Hmm. I'm putting these down. Okay. All
And
right.
he was only 40 years of age when he died.
I know. I don't know what moved me, but literally over the last week and a half, I know what it was because I was prepping for this conversation. So those of you who don't know, but when I actually sit with people before my digital couch conversations with them, I I do my homework. So I, look them up. Not, of course, I kind of have some familiarity with people, but if whether or not I do a little digging into their past, that which is, I'm allowed to, and so that I, of course, can be a good interviewer and a good host. So we're going to wrap up. Oh, so anyway, I was doing all this like research on Coltrane and who he married and how the influence of his wife, his first wife,
Oh yeah,
impacted, his perspective on spirituality coming from AME. And then I think she was Muslim when they
that is correct.
married, and then the influence of that, and then he studied Buddhism. Am I
Buddhism,
correct?
yeah,
Right, he studied
yeah,
Buddhism. So all
yeah.
of these influences like impacted his work and impacted the music. So let's wrap up with this final question. And the final question is, and so you've talked about your work in the church. You've talked about your work in the community. You've talked about the let's say the people that you've had on your own program and the greater circles that you have not only expanded your connections to, but you've also brought them in to sort of meet the people that you work with to bring them more information. And then the influences of, let's say, music and history and story and dance into the ministry, and how you literally are the minister on a mission. You're trying to expand the cultural and religious framework to not just be the part of tradition that we are raised with, but you're moving into some innovation, right? You're moving into innovation. How has this shifted your definition of Black manhood and Black minister leadership from, let's say, 20 years ago? Let's say in 20 years ago, would you have seen yourself doing what you're doing now, bringing all of these pieces together? How has your perspective on your role uh, shifted on your
I,
mission work?
I never saw whatever we're doing today. I never saw that from the very beginning. I never did. I can honestly say to you that when I got called to Bethlehem, I had no vision because I just got called to church. I didn't have
Hmm.
vision. And the conversations I generally heard was, God gave me this vision. I didn't get a vision right away. So it was really kind of to learn as much as I could, to read as much as I could, to study, and to see the value of moving forward.
Hmm.
And the thing about it is, by the time I got a vision to where God wanted to, and it wasn't the first year, it wasn't the second year, it wasn't the third year, it wasn't the fourth. I don't
Hmm.
think vision actually took place for me, to be very honest with you, until about year 18. And I've been there 32 years.
Wow.
So
Wow.
now some people would say it took you that long to get a vision. Well, it's the whole Jacob wrestling with the angel.
Hmm.
It leaves an injury somewhere. And so
Hmm.
I was trying to find myself like I was in life, trying to find out what I was supposed to do in ministry. And thankful to my daughter Asia, who did some research on my family. She's doing research on my father, on her mother's family, and she told me, she says, Dad, I hate to tell you, but your great grandfather, which I didn't know, him and my great grandmother died before I was born. She says he had about three families. But my cousin Desiree, who was an educator up in Rochester, New York, had did research and said that, now my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother, I only know them as far as South Carolina,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
all they know is as South Carolina. But
Got
my
it.
cousin Desiree found out and traced my mother's family, which was her father was my mother's brother, to West Africa, Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and
Wow.
Niger.
Beautiful.
So,
Beautiful.
and coming into finding oneself, that's spiritual within itself. Think about this, Dory Larry. We talk about the angels and how they keep watch over us.
Hmm.
Is that also a possibility of the ancestors keeping watch over us?
So I will say it depends on who. It depends on who you ask, what church,
That's
how they
true.
have been churched, how they have been churched, and what their. I would. This is my perspective. As my mother would say, this and 2 cents still won't get you on the bus. Um, but what their, let's say, their church protocol would allow them to accept, right? So we in let's just say maybe some of the churches that we have been raised in, we would say it's angels watching over us. But the moment that we say, well, what about our ancestors who have gone before us? Once we bring that word up, it's like we don't know what to say. But then there are other churches, let's say, that are, let's say, more connected to, let's say, South Carolina, right? And I'm speaking of South Carolina and like the Georgia Sea Islands, right? The Gullah communities that are still there. Oh, they gonna say this is grandmama who done showed up as the fly on the wall because
Right.
stuff is going on, right? They're gonna say that. Now, people up here may joke about that, but it's like, no, if you really get deep into that, that's like, no, 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 you're crossing over. Not really
That's
crossing
true.
over, but you can't. When people leave your life, you can't say that they are gone and they don't. There is no other connection to them.
Well,
There's a lot of stigma in that. So that's a whole other conversation that I'd love to have with somebody. But
with
yeah.
the Gullahs, them, my mother comes from South Carolina, and many people that come from South Carolina, they'll try to speak in a broken Gullah language, but they're just trying to imitate it. But in reality, brothers and sisters from the Caribbean don't understand what the Geechees are saying.
Mm-hmm. And then there's crossover. I actually had a very interesting conversation with some young from in my education world, where there's one group of people in Guyana who make this one particular little snack. And I looked at it and I said, oh, that looks familiar. And then now, again, people in Guyana, there are people who came from India and were sent to Guyana for indentured labor. And then there were Africans who went to Guyana enslaved. Then the same little item I know from Ghana as being a particular snack. And so I asked let's say, a descendant of the Indo-Guyanese family, how do you make it and what's the ingredient? It's the same exact ingredient and process, but made with a different legume. And the word is different with 2 letters. So there's bara, and those people who are from Guyana, if I'm saying it wrong, help a sister out. It's bara in as a Guyanese like snack, and then it's ankara or akara with from Ghana. It's basically like a little dumpling, if you will, that's made out of a legume with some flour and water and what have you, and then it's like deep fried. And I said, the name is the same, basically. The ingredients are the same. I just thought it was very, very interesting. So anyway, it looks like maybe there's a little shift. Not to worry. I do want to thank Reverend Camp for being with us tonight on the digital couch. Here we go. He's back.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yes.
All right. So I thought there was a disconnection. Not a problem. So right. I just wanted to just sort of wrap up and say, like, we're closer than we think. We're closer to each other than we think. And once we sort of cross the aisles and we recognize, of course, that there are more similarities than there are differences, and even in spiritual practice, in religious perspective, there is still one God. When people say, oh, Africans are polytheistic, they are monotheistic, but this is a whole other conversation. But the angels that sort of do some of the work, on behalf, may be called a different name, have a different attribute. That's a whole other conversation. And I'm not a religious professor, but I am willing to engage in the conversations that sort of don't shy away for those things that you see that you may not necessarily understand, but ask the questions and see where the parallels are within your own doctrine,
Yeah.
So I really thank you, Reverend Camp, for joining us on the digital couch. If there's any final words, please, I would love to hear from you. Again, this is Reverend Larry Camp, Pastor Camp from the Bethlehem Nation, Bethlehem Baptist Church. Again, I thank you with all of my heart for joining us, for sitting and having a chat, for engaging in some critical conversations as an inspirational leader of the community.
Well, I want to thank you, Dory Larry, for your creativity uh, and certainly your ingenuity that you have exemplified by me certainly taking it in and watching it. It's really, really good. And at the point that you made was a lovely point about Guyana and foods and pronunciation. I think what gets lost in history too among us is that um, African American blacks from African America always felt that those from the Caribbean acted as if they were condescending. They did feel like that, and and some people from the Caribbean would say, "Well, the American black is lazy." The American black would say,
That's
"What?
a
What?"
whole other conversation.
Yeah, it is. But you said you brought up the whole thing with the what
Yeah.
the American black is so much wasn't lazy. The American black said, "We've been in this country all this time. This is the best they can give us." And those from the Caribbean said, "We're gonna take whatever we can get," and which was fine. But I think that was a tribal difference, and some educated by the Belgium, the British, and the French,
And the Dutch.
and the Dutch. Absolutely.
Let's not even get into Haiti and Dominican Republic and the
Oh, listen,
whole
please.
dynamic down there.
That's right, a whole dynamic. But I enjoyed this evening. I'm honored that you've asked me to be a part of this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, to those people who have been watching and who stay with us to the end, we really do appreciate you. Again, if there, I will be able to actually, Reverend Camp, I will be able to go back into the comments because there are three platforms that we are on. I'm actually on my business page, Learn to Grow You, and I'm also on my YouTube channel, again, at Learn to Grow You. And so, if you want to get into contact with Reverend Larry Camp of the Bethlehem Nation, you can very easily click the link on his profile and then go to Bethlehem Baptist Church or the Bethlehem Nation. If you want to stay in contact with me and hear more of my content, you can either reach me on my personal page, Doria Larrier, or Learn to Grow You, which is my business name, my business, Learn to Grow You, Larry's Education and Resource Network. And next week, the final person on the couch for this series of ministers on a mission is Pastor Robert Linden of Bethelite Baptist Church. I love saying it like this, in the city of Brooklyn or in the borough of Brooklyn.
And a daughter of Bethlehem Baptist Church.
And right, and a daughter of Bethlehem Baptist Church. Absolutely. So we will hear from him next week. And I want to also say, and I'm going to send it to him, a shout out to my pastor, Reverend Dr. James Arthur Thornton, who is the first person who that is my pastor. And so I couldn't have this conversation without beginning with him. And then we moved to Reverend Richard Honeywell, who decided to go last week because next week, which is the original possibility, he's actually planning on taking probably like the 20th trip to, not maybe the 20th trip, but maybe like, I don't know, maybe the 10th trip to Ghana and taking a tour to Ghana and doing some wonderful work there to just local people around the country and taking a tour there. So he wanted to make sure that he can, sort of get his final, arrangements in order to get the people onto the plane to cross the waters in order to take their Sankofa journey, their trip home. So thank you very much once again. This conversation was to have ministers who I have seen, again, do the preaching in the pulpit, doing the service in the streets, and have you meet them and have you hear their voices and engage again in critical conversations that will move the hearts and the mind and the people within a cultural context from religious rights.
Right.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
I did.
Hear that? Okay, let's move on. But I really wanted to bring that to the forefront on none other than the Digital Couch. Have a good evening, everyone. I look forward to seeing you same time next week in the same place. Good night. But make sure you follow us. And if you're on YouTube, subscribe. Good night, everyone.